Hi, I'm Tom Gilson. I'm a writer and editor with a website called The Stream at stream.org. And I'm also someone who is day by day more and more increasingly impressed with the greatness of the character of the person of Jesus Christ. Now, I know skeptics would say that that's a little bit crazy on my part, that Jesus was just a legend. Why be impressed with him? My answer is Jesus is too good for that. He's too good to be false. Too good not to be true. Now, how do I come to that conclusion? Well, I start with a couple of points on which everybody can agree, which is that the story of Jesus, first of all, is a story. That is, for Christians, we'll say, tell me the story of Jesus. For skeptics, they'll say, it's just only a story. That's all it is. Either way, it's a story. And the second thing that we can all agree on, I think, quite readily, is that stories come from somewhere. Stories have a backstory. And we're often really interested in the backstory, where stories come from. That's why we will read biographies, maybe of George Lucas or Steven Spielberg. We'll want to know the story behind the story. And the story and the backstory have to make sense together. Otherwise, you know something is not quite right. Like, suppose someone came up with a new, say they found a new play that had been written in the style that made it sound very much like it had been written by one of the great Elizabethan playwrights, maybe even Shakespeare. And you look at it and you go, boy, this sounds like the real thing. Where did it came from? Where did it come from? And they say, well, there was a committee of British coal miners in the late 19th century who pulled this together. You say, no. Something's wrong with that backstory. I don't know if it has to do with the quality of the play or something, but I know that if we're going to figure out the truth about this play, we got to do some more investigating. The story and the backstory don't fit. Well, there's a backstory behind the Gospels as well. Actually, it comes in two versions. There's the Christian version, which says that the backstory is Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John either recorded their own eyewitness accounts or the accounts that they heard directly from eyewitnesses, and so they wrote down essentially the truth. They wrote down actually the truth. That what they present there is the account of the life of Jesus as he lived it, as he died and as he rose again as well. That's one version of the backstory, but the skeptics have another version of the backstory, which is that it's really just legend. And the legend, they say, comes from various places. One of the places would be in line with what's called cognitive dissonance reduction theory. If you want to look into this, there's a really fascinating book by Leon Festinger called When Prophecy Fails, where he talks about a woman who gathered a group who were going to be whisked away from the planet by the aliens from the planet Clarion just before they destroyed the Earth. And that was going to happen one night, and it didn't. It didn't. Surprise to us. Well, they were surprised, and they'd invested everything in this, and how are they going to live from this point on? Well, she came up with a way to make it true after all, which was that the aliens from Clarion saw their sincerity and changed their mind. Sometimes people will be so invested in some kind of a belief that they'll make it true even when it's false. And that's what some people say happened with Jesus. There was a band of followers following this real Jesus. They thought he was going to be great. They thought he was going to save them. He died. That ruined it. How are we going to make it true after all? We'll make a resurrection. That'll work. Now, others will add another piece to this, which is that the story of Jesus was produced by something like the party game, the telephone game, where people whisper something into the next person's ear and the next person's ear, and by the time it comes around to the original, it is grossly changed and distorted. But these are both highly distorting kinds of processes. In fact, cognitive dissonance reduction in this case would mean they're actually kind of crazy, making up something totally false in order to save their psyches. Well, does that fit with the story of Jesus? Probably not. In fact, I would say definitely not, in view of one aspect, at least, of his character that even skeptics ought to agree on, and that is his unique, other-centered, self-sacrificial goodness. Now, what makes that unique? Well, you can make a story about someone who's very self-sacrificial and very good, but no one's made a story like Jesus Not Shakespeare, not Goethe, not Dostoevsky, not Dickens, not Faulkner. No one's made a story like the story of Jesus, in which you have a really incredibly powerful person who was also incredibly other-centered, self-sacrificial, and giving. It just doesn't exist. All the powerful people in literature, all the powerful people in history, have got some element of flaw to them. They've got some element of doing it for themselves to some degree or other. Abraham Lincoln said, nearly all men can stand adversity, but if you want to test a man's character, give him power. Or Lord Acton, even more famously, said, power tends to corrupt, and absolute power corrupts absolutely. And you don't find interesting stories in particular about people who are really, really powerful and really, really good. Jesus was incredibly powerful according to the story, and he was incredibly self-sacrificial and giving according to the story. There is no other story like it. There is no story where someone has the kind of power that Jesus has or anything close to it and never uses it for his own benefit. Even Superman used his heat vision to warm up his coffee. Jesus came not to be served, but to serve and to give his life a ransom for many. Mark 10:45. This is unique in all of literature, certainly unique in all of history. No one's come up with a story like that, except for a band of followers who were really crushed and really disappointed and kind of crazy and wanted to make up a story and used the telephone game, a highly distorting thing, and they came up with the only ethically perfect self-sacrificial character in all of literature? I don't think so. I don't think the backstory that the skeptics propose fits the story that we read in the Gospels. Oh, and by the way, 4 Gospels. Not only did it come out with Jesus being ethically perfect once, but it landed 4 different places. Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. Obviously interrelated, but still separate stories. Either any one of them could have messed it up, but they didn't. Any one of them could have ruined it, but they didn't. It came out perfect in every case. This doesn't happen through distorting processes. It only happens through reality. It could only happen if Jesus was who they wrote he was. It could only happen if the story was true. The story of Jesus is just too good to be false.